All right, so this first part, I just want you to stay with me. You don't have to write any of this down. I'm just going to try and drag you through some logic, and then we will write part of this on the top of our notes to make sure we understand what's going on. But if we have this unit circle here, and I have an angle that is pi thirds. It's right about there somewhere, right? So we got pi thirds. What is my second quadrant pi thirds angle? 2 pi thirds, right? So 2 pi thirds is about right here. And then what's my third quadrant? 4 pi thirds. And then my fourth quadrant? 5 pi thirds, right? So there's different ways to know that. Some of you just know them, right? But one way, especially if you're like unsure, is this right here would be considered the reference angle for all of them, right? For all 4 of those angles, the reference angle is pi thirds. When you go to the second quadrant, if you know you're using a pi thirds angle or pi 6 or whatever, if I think about pi as 3 pi thirds and just back up 1, I'm at 2 pi thirds, right? 3 pi thirds, I go forward 1. I'm at 4 pi thirds, right? This is 6 pi thirds. I go back 1 and I get 5 pi thirds, right? That's how you use that reference angle there. Make sense? So let's say that you just knew those because you know them. Well, if I give you one that you don't necessarily know, like pi sevenths, what would my second quadrant pi sevenths angle be? 6 pi sevenths, because we're using that same logic where we get to 7 pi sevenths and back up 1, right? So that means this one would be what? 8 pi sevenths. Yes? And then my fourth quadrant would be 13 pi sevenths, because we would go to 14 and then back up 1. Everybody with me on that? Okay, now I'm not saying we have to know pi sevenths. We're not going to worry about, you shouldn't know like sine, cosine, tangent of that or anything, but just to get there. Because we're going to start using the calculator, and we have to understand what to do with the angles when they're not even pi's also. So let's say that I give you an angle, and it's like 3/4. There's no pi in it. Okay? So I need, and you're not going to be able to give me an actual, like you're not punching buttons on the calculator or anything, and you're not going to be able to give me just an exact number or anything here, but how would I figure out what my second quadrant angle would be when 3/4 is the reference angle? Think about how we did the others, but you can't do it fractionally. Like the fraction part doesn't work because there's not a pi in the numerator. You with me? Uh-huh. Yes, and so my reference angle is 3/4, right? So I need this, but I need to back up, which means what operation am I doing? Subtraction. So I get here and I subtract the 3/4, right? Here, subtract 3/4. So what is here? This is pi, right? So wouldn't this right here be pi minus 3/4? Right? Because we got to like 7 pi sevenths and backed up 1. So this is pi, whatever, 7 pi sevenths is pi. So this is just pi. And I just back up because then those reference angles are the same. You with me? So then this, well, how would I get this? Add. So this would be pi plus 3/4. Okay? And then here, what would this be? 2 pi minus 3/4. Okay? Because that concept right there you need. But you already know it. You've already been doing it. You just haven't really been thinking about the fact that you're actually using the pi and the 2 pi. Does that make sense to you?
Would it be wrong to say, like, in that fourth quadrant, would it be wrong to say 3 pi over 2 plus? Or no, sorry. That would be, okay, yeah, because the reference angle is from the x-axis.
Yes, exactly. So the reference angle is from the x-axis, so that's how you find it. It's a good question, though. It's a good question. The reference angle always goes with the x-axis, and even though I put this in the middle, it's not really exactly in the middle. I was just kind of estimating there. But are we all good so far? So that means that when we talk about reference angles, the reference angle is actually called alpha, right? And you can't see that, so let me see if I can use something better. Alpha, maybe the pink. Okay, alpha. So then this would be pi minus whatever alpha is, right? And this would be pi plus whatever alpha is. And this would be 2 pi minus alpha. Does that make sense to you? So same concept of how you found the angles that you understand. You get to pi, you back up 1. You get to pi, you go forward 1, thinking about the reference angle. Everybody good with that? Okay. So with that said, let's go to your notes. We're going to kind of recreate a little bit of that at the top. You have more room at the top than I do, sir. Okay, we're good. So we're going to draw a circle. I'll draw this one freehand, and it's going to look terrible, but it's all good. So I got my circle and got this. So alpha is my reference angle, right? That's always a first quadrant angle. It's acute, it's positive. So then the second quadrant will always be pi minus alpha. Third is pi plus alpha. And fourth is 2 pi minus alpha. Because we're going to be dealing with decimals with this, and you're familiar with the radians and how they work with pi right now, but you're not necessarily familiar with what the decimal approximations are. So I'm going to give you those just so you can make sure that you're in the right quadrant. So we know here we would start at 0, obviously. And we know that pi is 3.141 blah, blah, blah. Pi halves is 1.570 blah, blah, blah. And 3 pi halves is 4.712. And then 2 pi is 6.283, blah, blah, blah. It's like if you get a decimal and you know those approximations, then you should know what quadrant that angle is in. And you can make sure that you kind of have a reasonable answer. Does that make sense? Easy enough to figure those out. And it's not like you have to memorize those, because if you're getting decimals, you have a calculator, you could figure those decimals out again. But that's just there for you to kind of refer to. All right, so this says we are going to solve each trig equation on the interval from 0 to 2 pi, which means that it needs to be in radians, okay? And it doesn't say it on here, but the instructions on the homework do. It says this, and then it says to the nearest thousandth if it's not a, how's it worded? If it's not a special angle. So if you end up with the cosine inverse of the square root of 2 over 2, you better put pi fourths and not put the decimal for it. Does that make sense? If it's one you should know, you just put that, and then otherwise we're using the calculator for it. Okay? Easy enough? All right, so let's talk about these calculators first of all. So if you don't finish this in class today and you're doing this on your own, then you need to make sure that whatever calculator you're using is actually in Radian mode. But on these will probably in Radian mode because of last period, but let's just talk about how to change it back and forth. If you push the shift key and then setup, which is right next to on, that's where you make your choice of degrees or radians. So you just push 3 or 4. We want 4 for radians. You should have a little tiny R in a box up at the top. It should also say math to the right of it. If it doesn't, then you're in the wrong mode totally, and really weird things are going to happen. So does everybody have an R with math? Okay, we all good? And we'll know for sure after we do the first one if our numbers match or not. Everybody's good? Okay. All right, so let's look then at what to do. And don't get ahead of me on the calculator because it ain't going to work out exactly like you probably think it is. So we get, I'm going to solve this. So we solve this just like we've been solving all of them. So we get 5 times the sine of x equals negative 1. And then sine of x equals negative 1/5. So x equals the sine inverse of negative 1/5. Right? Again, don't get ahead of me, because if you're typing that in, you're wasting your time. Before you push the buttons at all, you've got to decide what quadrants you want this in. Your sine value is negative. So since my sine value is negative, what quadrants is sine negative in? 3 and 4. Which means I'm going to need pi plus alpha and 2 pi minus alpha, which also means that I need alpha, right? Alpha and x are not the same thing all the time. Sometimes they could be. The way you get alpha is you have to use the positive number in the calculator, because we want alpha, which is the reference angle. If you type in the sine inverse of negative 1/5, you're going to get a number that is not going to help you at all. So even though we're finding the sine inverse of negative 1/5, that's what we're finding. We type in the sine inverse of positive 1/5. So the sine inverse of 1/5 gives me 0.201 blah, 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 okay? Which is the first quadrant angle because it's somewhere between 0 and 1.57, right? Now, this number, I'm putting the dot, dot, dot there because this isn't an answer to anything, even if I wanted the first quadrant. This I need to store because I'm going to need to use it a few times. So we do shift, recall, right parentheses, which is the x. Now I've got it stored in x. You can store it wherever you want. X is just the easiest. All right, so now that I have that, now I need to actually find my x values, which means x is pi plus alpha. So I do shift and then the scientific notation looking key is where pi is. So pi plus recall right parenthesis, and I get 3.343. And then I do 2 pi minus alpha and get 6.082. Those are my x values. Okay. Questions? Make sure you're actually getting these numbers. Your answers never have this dot, dot, dot thing. I put the dot, dot, dot thing, that tells me something is stored, right? And it says to the nearest thousandth. So my answers are actually to the nearest thousandth. It's possible that you don't store it and you use this and you still get the right answer, but you won't always. Sometimes things round differently. You've got to store it in there. Or you don't necessarily have to store it. You just have to use the whole answer. So if you can do like, pi minus answer or whatever, all that's fine. All right, any questions at all? Everybody got that? So we know we're doing it in the right mode and whatnot? Good deal. All right, let's look at number 2. All right, so I have to solve this before I worry about doing anything on the calculator. So I'm thinking I need to do some reciprocal stuff. So I'm going to make this 5 cosine of x equals 2 over what? Cosine x. Now, it is possible that you will work a problem where you end up with the sine of something and the cosine of something, or you get 2 cosines or whatever, and then you just have to kind of treat them as separate answers with their quadrants. But here I'm going to be able to get it all in cosine. What do I do here? Good. Multiply both sides by cosine. So I get 5 cosine squared x equals 2. So cosine squared x equals 2/5. So what does cosine equal? Plus or minus the square root of 2/5. And y'all going to make me lose my mind with you leaving off plus or minus. Okay, not everybody's doing it, but some people do it a lot, and some people do it every now and then. You cannot forget that. It's just going to kill you as far as your work is concerned. Now, do I need to rationalize? No, because the calculator is going to do all this stuff for me, right? So I get x is equal to the cosine inverse of plus or minus the square root of 2/5. All right, so now, since it is plus or minus, which quadrants do I want? All of them. Yeah, I want all of them, right? So I need to find alpha. So my alpha is the cosine inverse of the square root of 2/5. Which gives me 0.886, and then I need to store that. And then go ahead and find your other 4 answers. Any questions at all? I'll wait for y'all to finish typing them all in. But don't just copy mine down. Push the buttons. Make sure you're actually getting it. Needs to go in order from least to greatest, yes. All right, is everybody good? Yes? Okay. All right, let's look at number 3 then. I've got 4 cosine x and negative 7 sine x. And again, sometimes you end up factoring and you have 2 different functions in there, but this isn't going to be a factoring one. So I can divide by either cosine or sine, and I would get something I could use, right? Which one you want to divide by? Yes, yes. Cosine, okay. So I'm going to divide both sides by cosine. I'll get 4 equals negative 7 sine x over cosine x, right? Then I can divide by the negative 7, and what is sine over cosine? Tangent. So I'm just left with negative 4/7 equals tangent of x. So x is the tangent inverse of negative 4/7. So which quadrants am I going to be getting answers for? Second and fourth, right? So I need a second, so that means I'll have 2 answers. You need to find alpha, and then you also need to find the actual answers for x. So I'm going to give you a minute to do that. Let me know if you're having any calculator issues or any other issues. Okay. Do we all agree with that? We're good? Okay, good deal. I know some of y'all are still typing and writing. I'll give you a second. All right, but when you are done and you agree with me, go ahead and you can get it put in your ISN.